More and more African cities are going green, and Johannesburg has set aside $20 million of this year's budget to spend on environment and infrastructure. The change is mainly happening in Sandton, Africa's richest square mile and the country's business hub. Sandton is leading the green building revolution and is thinking long-term, implementing high-tech projects for generations to come.
It makes cities more enjoyable, healthier. It's better for the human spirit. It reduces public transport. It generally makes for a better life. We can use technology to improve our buildings. It's really the right way to go. I mean, we have got no choice but to reduce our footprint on this earth. It's quite clear.
But green buildings have the potential of addressing environmental issues and socio-economic issues for the rest of the continent and for South Africa itself.
Johannesburg is investing heavily in its inner city, but there's still a long way to go when addressing infrastructure and environment in townships.
The future of this continent should try and marry these two dynamics. How to respond to the urgent needs of the poor people in cities, and at the same time, how to prepare your involvement into the global economy. It's not easy. And I know that the city of Johannesburg is addressing this issue.
Although future designs work well, the reality is that the majority of this city's population still lives in informal settlements and townships. And the change is not happening fast enough here.
If you can see a condition in Alex, there are many shacks that it's just a squatter camp that you can't live in. And it's unfortunately that there's nothing that we can do. Our government is promising, but they don't do anything.
The Africites Summit hopes winds of change will sweep through Johannesburg. But the question remains, what will Joburg and other African cities look like in 50 years? Yes, infrastructure is being put into place, but there's still a long way to go, especially in townships. And Johannesburg must create a cohesive African city for all. Julie Scheier, CCTV, Alexander Township, Johannesburg.
And on that note, climate change is quite a hot topic in Africa right now. And Mohamed Bouvergui, the Director General of the AU's Africa Risk Capacity Agency, is live in Johannesburg right now to discuss the upcoming Paris conference on climate change and, of course, Africa's plans in this area going forward. Mr. Mohamed, great to have you on the show. The U.S. Secretary of State has argued that whatever climate agreements is arrived on in Paris is not a legally binding treaty. What are your thoughts on this argument?
Well, as a civil servant, it's difficult for me to have thought about sovereign declarations. But what I will say is that climate issues are very pressing now, particularly for Africa. And that's why Africa took this issue very seriously and started designing its own solutions. One of these is the African risk capacity. The African risk capacity has as objective to set up a system that over time will become self-financing to face climate disaster financing in the continent.
Now, Mr. Mohamed, the World Bank's estimated that sub-Saharan Africa states need anywhere between $5 to $10 billion a year to fund climate adaptation. Now, is this an accurate figure for you? And what measures do you think need priority funding in Africa when it comes to this?
Well, the actual figure that was identified in the report of Economics of Climate in 2010 was 14 to 17 billion annually. That was the estimate in terms of needs. But it is clear that when you look at the landscape of Africa, you note one thing is that 60% of its people live in the rural areas. And among those, 60 to 70% are the poorest. And in addition to that, they represent most of the time 30% of the GDP and much more than that in terms of occupying people. Also, they produce 80% of the food that is consumed in Africa, even if you import the 20% from outside of the continent. So therefore, these people are extremely important in terms of our economy, in terms of employment, in terms of development, progress, and poverty reduction. But unfortunately, they are the ones who are receiving the biggest impact of climate effects. So, and as well, not receiving enough resources in order to face these constraints. So investing in these people in terms of adaptation, in terms of making them more prepared to respond to the challenges that are raised by climate will certainly be the priority.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Mohammed, for those insights. Of course, he's joining us from Johannesburg.